Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to AddisDialogue with me, Shifarao Lako. Now, as a nation that had never been colonized, Ethiopia played a significant role as a beacon of hope for Africans fighting for their freedom. And its resistance to Western powers made it a beacon of African freedom and resistance. But how significant was Ethiopia in the Pan-Africanism movement? Well, we're going to talk about a host of issues in this regard. And to put it into perspectives, I'm joined by Dr. Dechasa Abebe from the Addis Ababa University. He is a researcher of African and Asian studies. Do stay with us. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us by coming to EBC's compound and for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for the invitation also.
Whenever we talk about Ethiopia, one of the things that comes to the fore is Ethiopia's landslide victory against the Italians at the Battle of Adwa. So how significant was that victory, when it comes to the Pan-Africanism movement?
Okay, the Battle of Adwa, I think is significant not only for the Ethiopian history or at the level of we Ethiopians, but also Africans. Probably that is because during the period we are mentioning, almost the entire African continent was either conquered or fully colonized by the European powers. And many of them, of course, tried their best to defend their domain or territories, and some of them probably achieved just short-term victories, but couldn't maintain that victory for long. But Ethiopia, unlike the other African country, was successful in defending its sovereignty by its decisive victory that achieved at the Battle of Adwa, as we all know. Therefore, that can be considered as symbolic for the rest of the African countries, which probably on the process of resisting or either to liberate themselves after a long period of colonization, of course, for about 5 or more decades. From that point of view, we can say the Battle of Adwa or the victory itself can be considered as symbolic, as well as a source of inspiration for the other African regions in their movement against colonialism, particularly for the ultimate liberation movement, or after then they achieved their independence, of course.
So, Dr. Dechasa, could you give us a little background information regarding Ethiopia's historical significance in the context of Pan-Africanism?
Okay, it is something associated with this, the victory of Adwa. Of course, the movement itself, the Pan-African movement, initiated not in the continent of Africa initially, rather it was initiated somewhere else in America and some parts of Europe by the African diaspora there, who were, we can say, descendants of the slaves who were taken hundreds of years before. After their liberation from slavery, at least achieved their liberation, but were in a sort of either exploitation or, shall I say, not only economic exploitation, but also this alienating them from every aspect of privileges, or discriminations were there, racism were there, and identifying them as simply Africans, regardless of their different areas of origin, their background. Some of them could be from East Africa, some from West Africa, or from somewhere else, and their area of origin known by different local names. but there they were all identified as Africans. Therefore, their movement itself and they themselves, I think, believe in that common identity and their movement named as Pan-Africanism. Just a movement that brought them together, or bringing all Africans, at least the Africans in the diaspora, against the problems they were facing by then. It can be economic problem, the social discrimination, the economic exploitation, or absence of participation in the political aspect. Therefore, after having such type of movement there, they took Ethiopia as their ideal example. At least they were inspired by the victory itself. They developed a feeling that we can achieve what we need. That their need was just, shall I say, independence from or liberation from the problems they were facing in different aspects. Therefore, at the initial stage, the Ethiopian significance was more of, shall I say, ideological or something moral, or instead of the material or something like that. Or it's better to call it as something psychological, ideological, or something like that.
Obviously, Ethiopia's victory at the Battle of Adwa has galvanized African countries into action to fight for their freedom, to fight against those colonial powers. So how does Ethiopia's status as a country that had never been colonized influence its relationship with other African countries in the fight against colonial powers and also in the fight for their freedom and independence?
Okay, as we mentioned, I think the Pan-African movement initially began in the other parts of the world, gradually brought to the African soil by African students who were, I think, studying in different European or American universities. They came with the idea of not only the problem of African diaspora, but the Africans here on their own soil, who were colonized by the Europeans at shall I say, facing different economic, political, or social problems. Therefore, the Pan-African movement there initially didn't raise the issue of African independence, now began to raise the issue of not only solving the problems of African diaspora, but achieving independence from European colonialism. Therefore, this needs not only ideological support or material or other forms of support, but also looking at Ethiopia at their ideal example or ideal symbol, and how it maintained its independence for long. Not only that, Ethiopia also began to act as a role model for them, and particularly during the time of Emperor Haile Selassie, began to provide different forms of support for the African movement for independence, particularly in the form of ideological support, even to the extent of training, either military or other forms of training for African liberation leaders and the like. Therefore, we can say Ethiopia provided the rest African countries with different forms of provisions. It does not mean only the material support, rather even the ideological one, or probably different forms of technical supports were provided.
So it was more of psychological rather than material, the support.
Regarding the material, I think for few of them, the material provision was provided during the imperial period. And also during the period of Colonel Mengistu, a number of provisions were provided for African movement for liberation or late movement for liberation. Most of them got their independence even during the period of the reign of Emperor Haile Selassie, I'm saying. But some of them became late in achieving their independence, and those latecomers got the same aid or the same support from the military government of Ethiopia, just like the emperor did before that. Particularly, the emperor had good relationship with almost all the leaders of the independent movement in different parts of Africa. We can raise his just very good relationship with Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Julius Nyerere of, I think, Tanzania, and the like. All this got from the emperor. Not only this, the issue I have raised earlier, what we call this the material and the ideological, but also the material and technical also. Probably some of them were made secretly and the like, just to hide the entrance or shall I say, the interference of the Western power.
That's interesting. Thanks so much for that explanation. So Ethiopia is now the seat of the current African Union, or the Organization of the African Unity, the OAU. So how significant is this, and what roles did Ethiopia play for the formation of the Organization of the African Unity?
I think the Organization of African Unity can be considered as the ultimate goal of, cannot be considered as the ultimate goal of the movement for independence, but it can be considered as a byproduct in some aspect. Why? Because initially the African movement for independence almost was shall I say, expected that Africa will be independent. But what will be done after the independence? How the future of Africa will be shall I say, the form of government, administration, or whatever, the fate of Africa after independence. Here, there are a number of debates, or shall I say, sometimes even controversies among the leaders of the movement. Some of them were aspiring for a form of federal government after the model of United States of America, by imagining United States of Africa in a form of government having common currency, common army, and other forms of commonalities. Some of them consider this idea as a very, very infant. Africa could not be in such situation at that particular moment. Rather, each African country could achieve its respective independence and work together in economic, social, cultural, and other aspects before the achievement of this common federal state. And even to the extent of having different blocks, on absence of agreement on the future of Africa. Even the so-called the Casablanca bloc and the Monrovia bloc comes in because of this difference among them. Even some scholars considered this movement as something about 3 or more blocks even, along the Francophone line, along the Anglophone line, and the like. Here, Ethiopia, regarding this issue, seem in one way or the other neutral. Initially seem neutral, but tend to be Francophone. And at the end of the day, the independence was, in one form or another, achieved. Therefore, they were on the verge of simply just dispersed without any common whatever form of meeting or yeah. At that point, Ethiopia brought this idea of if we are not in a position to have United States of Africa, let us form a certain forum on which we can discuss about the future of Africa or the issue of Africa, exchange ideas and the other thing. Therefore, this what we call Organization of African Unity can be considered as a solution brought by Ethiopia to bring those different blocks for a common interest or something like that. Therefore, it can be taken as an organization, the idea at least brought by the Emperor of Ethiopia and provided all the necessary materials, including the space and having the headquarters here in Addis.
So, as a proponent of this Pan-Africanism movement, what were some of the challenges that Ethiopia faced internally or externally? Could you walk me through some of the major challenges that Ethiopia faced in this regard?
Well, there can be mentioned a number of challenges, particularly the internal challenge itself, the level of development, the economic aspect can be mentioned as one challenge, and also the regional problem itself. I mean, the regional problem, particularly the boundary disputes among the African countries, including the countries in Eastern Africa, and all the problems which were prevailing in the OAU can be considered as the problems which Ethiopia was facing. Like, as a proponent of the idea, Ethiopia could not fully materialize some of its needs in the OAU. Even the OAU itself could not be up to the expectation before the challenges that were prevailing at that time. Those challenges were also Ethiopia's challenges. We can take, for example, the issue of language, the issue of working language in the OAU itself. As a proponent of the idea, Ethiopia could have its own language in that office. Yeah, unfortunately, except at the initial point, any of Ethiopian language could not be there in the Organization of African Unity. Rather, other colonial languages were there. Not as such the direct problem for Ethiopia, but to materialize many of the issues among the African countries. They divide themselves along this language division. Anglophone versus Francophone, Lusophone versus Italian speakers or something like that. I don't think Ethiopia could not fully materialize many of the issue as expected. Even having OAU here in Addis Ababa could have been a big privilege for well-educated Ethiopians, having different offices within that organization. Unfortunately, we don't have such significant personalities in the OAU. Rather, I think low status employment opportunities are open for Ethiopia. Many of these like, for example, the secretary office and the like were for long decades occupied by others. Therefore, we couldn't, or Ethiopia couldn't break into that even if it played a great role in founding the organization, could not harvest and probably this issue of Pan-Arabism, Pan-Africanism versus Pan-Arabism was also there. Some of the African countries claiming that they are Africans on the one hand and having their one foot in the Arabian, and having these things together or bringing such divergent issues together, probably challenging for the emperor himself and later on for the Ethiopian rulers. We can have also the ideological problem. The period of the Cold War itself was well prevailed in the working situation of the OAU. Some of the African countries became pro-Soviet Union or became in the socialist camp, and others in the capitalist camp, and could not in a position to solve or discuss their common African problems. They could not be African in real sense of the term.
Do you have any final message as to what Ethiopia in particular and African countries in general do, in order to tackle some of these pressures and challenges?
Well, as a historian, I don't have as such the ready-made recommendation for the current African problem, but what I feel is Africa is still far behind in this economic sense of the term. If you have ample economic power, there is a tendency to be heard or to be influential in any part of global affairs. To have such a place in the global affairs, I think particularly the emerging African generation could be capable enough, particularly from science and technology point of view, from the education point of view, and other, instead of in a very local problems and situation immersed. Almost many of the African regions are immersed in very local and trivial problems. They cannot in a position to look far how to be out of this vicious circle local problem. Therefore, we need to be strong enough in our this particularly education system, this development and the like issue. This is commonly what I'm thinking as a layman, not as a professional regarding this issue.
I really enjoyed your ideas, Dr. Dechasa Abebe, historian from the Addis Ababa University. Many thanks for your ideas.
Okay, thank you also.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Many thanks to you as well for having been with us so far. And till I see you next time with yet another program, it's a goodbye from me, Shifa Raulak. Take care and stay safe.